Time magazine called him the unsung hero behind the internet. CNN called him a father of the internet. President Bill Clinton called him one of the great minds of the information age. He has been voted history's greatest scientist of African descent. He is Philip Emeagwali. He's coming to Trinidad and Tobago to launch the 2008 Kwame Ture lecture series on Sunday, June 8th at the JFK Auditorium, UWI St. Augustine, 5 p.m. The Emancipation Support Committee invites you to come and hear this inspirational mind address the theme, crossing new frontiers to conquer today's challenges. This lecture is one you cannot afford to miss. Admission is free, so be there on Sunday, June 8th, 5 p.m. at the JFK Auditorium, UWI St. Augustine.
The 17th century was the century of calculus. The 18th century was the century of physics. The 19th century was the century of non-Euclidean geometry. And the 20th century was the century of the computer. I believe that the 21st century will be the century of the planetary-sized supercomputer that will encircle the Earth as a super intelligent internet. I discovered parallel processing, both theoretically and a priori. And I did so before I discovered the technology experimentally and invented the technology across a new internet. That is a new global network of 65,536 processors that were tightly coupled to each other and that were identical to each other. I discovered how to massively parallel process across a new internet, and how to do so by using the binary reflected naming code to name each of my 64 binary thousand processors that uniformly encircled my new internet and encircled it in the manner a sphere tightly encircled a cube. That was how I discovered a priori how to reduce 64 binary thousand days or 180 years of computing within only one processor to only 1 day of supercomputing across a new internet that is a new global network of 64 binary thousand processors. At 8:15 in the morning of the 4th of July 1989, I experimentally reconfirmed my theoretical discovery and reconfirmed it as practical parallel processing across a new ensemble of 64 binary thousand tightly coupled processors, each computing at 647,303 calculations per second. I remember that date because it was also celebrated as the US Independence Day. I celebrate that 4th of July 1989 as the day I became the first person to figure out how to solve grand challenge problems and how to solve such real-world problems at the then world's fastest speed of 3.1 billion calculations per second. My discovery of practical parallel processing made the news headlines because I solved a long-standing enigma in supercomputing. Namely, I upgraded a science fiction story from a lecture that I delivered back in November 1982 to a science fiction story and a science fiction story that was first published back on February 1, 1922. And I upgraded that fiction to a non-fiction that entered into modern supercomputer textbooks and that became the vital technology that underpins every supercomputer. My discovery of practical parallel processing made the news headlines back in 1989, and it was later praised by then US President Bill Clinton, who revisited that discovery in his televised White House speech of August 26, 2000. President Bill Clinton described my contribution as a formula that enables computers to compute faster. My discovery of practical parallel processing that President Bill Clinton spoke about opened new fields of study, such as extreme-scale computational mathematics, science, and engineering. My discovery of practical parallel processing that occurred on the 4th of July 1989 made the news headlines because it will become a vital technology that will underpin the fastest computations. My invention made the news headlines because computing a million things at once instead of only one thing at a time changed our idea of what the supercomputer will become in a decade and what the computer of your great-grandchildren will be like in a century. My search for a new supercomputer was a search for the parallel supercomputer that I discovered on the 4th of July 1989 and discovered to be a new internet that is a new global network of 2 raised to power 16 processors that were married together as one cohesive virtual supercomputer. In 1989, I was in the news headlines because I discovered that parallel processing is the vital technology for all supercomputers and possibly for the computer of tomorrow. I discovered that parallel processing is the vital technology that will enable a supercomputer to use the slowest processors in the world that are configured as a new internet and use them to compute faster than the fastest supercomputer in the world. In my search for that new computer that is faster than any supercomputer, I failed more often than I succeeded. In fact, I failed most of the time. Looking back to the 1980s, an entire decade that I was the only full-time programmer of the most massively parallel supercomputer ever built, and a machinery that was powered by an ensemble of 65,536 processors, I said that the parallel supercomputer was then like heaven and hell that were outside the realms of our existence.
Insightful and brilliant lecture.